Cold War French tank design is really quite unique as their approach is different from any other country. They were one of the first of massive incorporation of autoloading tanks, but they had to do it in a very specific manner because autoloader technology hadn't quite reached its peak yet. Because if you have an autoloader, of course, it can only feed the gun from one specific position, where, of course, it's mounted. How do you make sure that the gun is perfectly aligned with the autoloader so that the shell can feed, instead of having the gun too far elevated or too far depressed? Instead of making some kind of technological system to make sure that the barrel gets elevated to the right position, they instead decided to just make the entire top of the turret one big piece, directly mount the autoloader in the back of it, and the gun in front of it. And when you want the gun to elevate, you just elevate the entire top of the turret, which is the result of the oscillating turret designs. And right here we got one of those. And these are made by a bunch of community members, and they just went out of their way to make oscillating turrets using plates. Of course, the turret itself doesn't actually move alongside with the gun, but it still has some very interesting designs going on here. So this is the Soa SM made by Leo M252. Sadly, the turret doesn't spin at all, so there are some limitations there, but the tank itself is pretty cool. And this was a prototype heavy tank, basically, which had a lot of armor protection in the front for a design like this, where most other tanks, for example the Lorraine 40T, which we're going to see in a little bit, only having like 40 to 70 millimeters of armor, this thing actually rocked in with over 200 millimeters of armor. And yeah, that is really quite impressive to have on a tank like this, especially if you consider the oscillating turret being so heavy, which just makes it like rotate like this slowly. And of course in Sprocket that's not exactly ideal, but it is still a very cool tank design. And with that, we are gonna move on to the Panart EVR. So the Panart EVR is an armored car that was really popular by the French military, which had a design where you had a front drive and a rear driver, and allowing it to go just as fast forward as going backwards by simply swapping the driver, with the engine being underneath the turret. The turret is once again an oscillating design, in this case with the 75mm FL10 turret from the 1965 design, and this one is made by Stube. Sadly, we cannot simulate the special wheels that this one had in real life, where the middle wheels could be raised up and down, and they had metal, like tires, and a lot more grip for off-road travel. Of course, being a wheeled design, you have to make the sprockets as tiny as possible to kind of hide them, which leads to them being much slower than normal tank designs, so of course the mobility is not going to be very amazing. Gun itself, 75mm gun here, and then the FL10 design, which is one of the earlier guns that it was using. Now we're gonna move on to the M4A1 FL10 105mm L51, which was a modernization of the M4A1 tank, mounting a new turret with a 105mm gun. And this one was made once again by Leo M252, and it really is just a Sherman M4A1 with the rounded turret edges, hull edges, and is very big turret to mount a 105mm gun, and it really barely fits in there. And impressively enough, the engine also had an upgrade, as well as the suspension for higher mobility, to really make this thing quite mobile. And overall, it was a very well liked design, but of course, it was still a design based on the chassis of a World War II tank, making it not very desired in the long run, which is where they decided to upgrade to the actual French designs, which ultimately led to the Leclerc main battle tank, and well, the MX50 in between there, but those are not really included in the pack, so I can't really talk much more about those. Yeah, this is one of the French modernized Shermans. Moving on, we are going over to the M4 FL10. So the FL10 design is basically mating the FL10 oscillating turret onto different designs. The FL10 is completely referring to just that turret with the 75mm gun that also was used by the EVR. And this one was also made by Leo M252, and that's another really slow turning turret design, but that's alright. And yeah, this was actually made on the M4 hull chassis. It was more common generally to see this on the M4A4 chassis, which was much longer to fit a larger engine. But it's still like they still decided try to put it on different kinds of M4 chassis. And on the just the regular M4 was also one of those. Again, just a modernized version of a Sherman. So very much a very powerful tank, as the under the 5mm gun is pretty powerful. And of course it reloads very quickly thanks to the oscillating turret autoloader design. With that, we're actually going to go to the Lorraine 40T, which was another prototype of French oscillating turret designs made by Lorraine. 40-ton tank, once again made by Leo. And this design featured a 100mm autoloading gun, which had like a 4-second reload. So it was really, really fast. In Sprocket, we can't even reach that. It's still being at 6 seconds. But yeah, reload was fast, firepower was absolutely insane. But the armor protection was actually very thin. You would think that with a pike nose on a tank design like this, it would have very thick armor, because pike nose is good for optimizing kinetic protection on stuff like the IS-3 or even the IS-10 and IS-7 designs. But nope, it's like 40mm of frontal protection there, like not counting the angles, so only leading up to like 70mm. So it really is quite a squishy tank, but it still weighs quite a ton, so that's why it really didn't go anywhere. And now we got some Batcha and Char 25T designs, which are prototype light tanks. Once again, oscillating turrets, and yeah, these are just the same guns basically, just made it onto a light tank chassis. And I really think this tank chassis has been very impressively built, because there's all of the irregular shapes that had to be made using panels, and they're really hidden quite well here in the back. And overall, this is a very, very neat design of a light tank. And with that, we also have the Batcha 25T, which was the actual like design that was produced even less as of a prototype. The Chart 25T was at least produced a little bit. The Batcha was really not quite produced a lot. And yeah, another one of those oscillating turrets. I'm pretty sure this is the FL10 turret again. Correct me if I am wrong, but I'm pretty sure this was the FL10 as well. Again, light tank chassis, just commander's gotta be up in the turret. There's gonna be a driver in the front, and then the engine next to the driver. That's how small this design was. Pretty much the size of something like an M24 Chaffee. Reloads, once again, very, very fast. Very nice design. And now we actually got the oldest design in here, the ARL44 ACL1. So this was secretly designed still during World War II, but it wasn't produced until after the war. And it really was quite the underwhelming design. It really felt like a French Tiger 1 tank in terms of its capabilities. But it used like very outdated suspension mechanics. Like you can see here, the track still runs over the entire side sponsons. You have a large amount of wheels in a similar setup as like a Churchill suspension. The frontal hull protection is at least decent on the ACL1, but the later actual normal ARL 44 would have much better protection there. as well as a much more impressive turret, with this gun being pretty underwhelming. I don't recall what the caliber exactly was, but it was a very, very small caliber gun. Actually, here it says 75, but I think it was even smaller, to be honest. I'm not even sure anymore at this point, but yeah, not a very impressive design in terms of capabilities. Now we got the AMX50 100, which is the AMX50 hull, made with a 100mm, of course, oscillating turret design, and another one of those like prototype tanks. This one actually had interleaved suspension, similar to the Tiger designs, and the French just tried it out and decided it was not worth the effort, so they kind of shoot away from it really, really quickly. And that's another reason why this design didn't get anywhere. And with that, we got the MX50 Sir, which is another one of those really big French tanks. This is one of the few heavy tanks as well. And this one has an absolutely massive 120mm gun on this very, very big oscillating turret. Let's see how large this monstrosity is. Has a side machine gun part as well. And overall, it is just very, very big. And even then, it had a reload of only a couple seconds longer than the other guns, despite being even just a 120mm gun, simply because of the oscillating turret. And this is what led to the French having like the fastest firing guns around at the time. Even though they just fired solid shot, they were still very, very potent. And then we actually got a French tank destroyer. And as a tank destroyer, of course, you can't have parts of the hull move up and down. And because they didn't have the technology to like have the gun fixed in place for when we need it, it ended up with the tanks just having not another loader at all. So while this thing has the same powerful 120mm gun, it actually has like a much longer reload. Um, it really is quite sad, like that they couldn't manage to find any way of locking it in place. Maybe have like two bars that you could put over and under the thing to force it into a certain position or something. Like a mechanical travel lock on the inside that you could engage to force it into the right position for it to reload. But they didn't have that. And of course, with the gun mounted in front of this thing like this, it is very out of balance and really, really long. So it really caused a lot of problems with it, like chopping off trees basically when it went. And it really wasn't maneuverable at all because it really couldn't get through any small spaces, which was really quite a problem for a tank like this, much more than you would think. And yeah, another one of those designs that really didn't get anywhere. And at some point, I just gave up and I just went with like the 105mm smoothbore gun and I went with the MX30 there. We do have some more light tanks actually, with the MX13 being another one of the oscillating turret 75mm gun mounts on a very small little boy, even smaller than the Char 25s. And it was actually quite a well-liked one, and it was one of the tanks that, as far as I'm aware, was mass-produced. At least for a while, with different turret configuration, including even ATGM launchers on them, with the HOT or HOT missiles. And yeah, it was actually just a quite well-liked tank for what it was, even though it was a very small tank with only 3 crew members. And yeah, it actually stayed in service for quite a little while. And then we're going to go to the last design here, the AMX ELC BIS by Celine Moon. So, like, you yeet me with the ARL-44, Stoop with the Panart, and Celine Moon with the BIS. Those are the other ones not made by Leo M252. Ours were all made by him. And the ELC BIS is one of, if not the smallest tanks with a functional turret that I've ever seen. It's absolutely tiny, with the crew having to basically lie down for it to work. But even then, it's still very mobile because of how little it weighs. And overall, it's just a marvel in how small you can make an armored vehicle. and how much the technology progresses, because this thing is faster than like light tanks from World War II, but has more armor than it, and has a better gun, yet at the same time is still more compact than any of those designs. So it is a direct upgrade without any downsides other than maybe crew comfort. But sometimes, especially with the Russian tanks, you trade comfort for having just a more well-protected machine that is more capable and cheaper to produce. So sometimes crew comfort has to take a little bit of a back seat in favor of the tank's capabilities, which is always like an interesting design choice and something that I always am interested to be looking at. But yeah, with this one, it is a very capable design, at the downside of it being almost impossible to reload the gun because of said crew comfort and it not being an auto-loader. But still being a pretty big gun with a 90mm low velocity heat slinging gun here. And yeah, that's it. That's all of the French tanks in the Cold War front pack. As always, the download is available down in the description. Go to the website and you can download a zip file containing all of the blueprints. The blueprint files are the only one files included. You will not have the uh, blueprint meta files or the thumbnails, but those are fine because as soon as you like load the build and then press save, you will generate new files for the meta and PNG files. Those are not necessary. And as always, you can look at the previous videos for tutorials, as having to repeat the full tutorial in every video tends to take a little bit long and is not very interesting. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys all in the next one.